Hey, what's going on, guys? Today I just really briefly want to go over the song Leanin and really just define its origin, creative process, and the overall just brilliant moment that was captured musically in the recording studio. I could just only imagine the experience that must have been with Lil Peep, fishnarc, and smokeasac all in the same room and during the same creative timeline, right before they hit the record button. I could just imagine the creative energy and just beautiful vibes and harmony that was in that room that day. But without sounding too Shakespearean and philosophizing about, I don't even know if that's a word, about the creative process, let's just get into the factors of this song. Now, obviously, smokeasac produced this song, and it has a very nice, clean, watery, guitar-laced production to it. Obviously, fishnarc applied a bass guitar rhythm to it, which has a very nice, cool, thumpy pulse. It really just gives the track a very nice, subtle heartbeat. It's very dark and just very pulsy, almost like a heart beating steady. Now, when I first heard this song, the original version, of course, because that's what we're covering, the very first thing that was very reminiscent to me about the song from the opening bass riff was the song Violet by Hole. Now, if you guys aren't familiar with Hole, that's Courtney Love's band. She was married to Kurt Cobain. But to me, it sounded like a slower tempo version of Violet. And I think that is very interesting because I think it displays not only Peep, but smokeasac and fishnarc's overall deep-rooted attraction and fascination with Nirvana type sound and alternative type melodies, and how just beautiful and dark and melancholy and attractive those kind of sounds were. So the guitar to me is very interesting, one of the key elements in this overall creation. It's a very nice grungy guitar. It's very reminiscent to like a Kurt Cobain signature sound. Just a very clean Fender sound with a splash of chorus. Just gives it this nice watery effect. You know, that's one thing I really loved about Nirvana and I miss about that band. Kurt had like the best sound ever. Like his guitar sound was so signature and it just sounded so fucking clean and raw, and it just, the overall output of his guitar tone and his amplifiers just sounded so beautiful. It sounded like beautiful chaos, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I think it also shows that Peep was very attracted to that kind of melody. And I don't think he spoke too much about Nirvana in interviews, but he was really never asked about them. You know, just because Peep never really spoke about Nirvana doesn't mean he wasn't a deep-seated fan. You know, I'm sure if someone, excuse me, I'm sure if a interviewer actually posed a Nirvana question, I'm sure they would have generated a lengthy, detailed response out of Peep about Nirvana, but no one ever did. He would just always bring up the bands that was close to his heart and reminiscent and very just relative to his style, you know. But I think during the later part of his creative timeline, he was turning very Nirvana-esque, if you will. There's nothing wrong with that. Nirvana made beautiful music. Kurt Cobain was an insanely talented musician, songwriter, and melody composer. His level was godlike. Just because Kurt did opiates behind closed doors has nothing to do with the beautiful musical output he had. He was a creative genius in his own right. So if you ever hear me talk about Kurt and Peep in the same sentence, I mean no disrespect at all. I mean all respect and all. It's just very humbling for me to talk about them too. I know some fans get upset and they don't like the Kurt Cobain comparison, but for me it's honor and respect when I mention his name with Kurt. They're both amazing musicians and they're both 100% original, which is very important in today's music, or in music in general. Now, I kind of told some people in previous videos that Come Over When You're Sober Part 2 was probably going to be a collection of songs handpicked and plucked by Peep out of his sessions during the Come Over When You're Sober Part 2 timeline. Not necessarily like everyone got in a room and just made beats for this album. I just think Peep probably nailed out like 20, 25 songs and was just going to pluck the ones he deemed fitting for Part 2. So I know some fans seem flabbergasted and they're just blown away when I tell them that part 2 would feature other producers this time. And they always say, well, Come Over When You're Sober it's exclusively produced by Smokeasac. And you are 100% correct. Part 1 definitely was, but I think part 2 would have been a collective venture, and I think he would have shared the fruits of his labor with everybody on part 2. And I just think it wasn't intended that way. I just think the songs Peep was going to put on the track list just ended up being a collaborative effort by everyone in his life at that point. Not necessarily like he wanted to do that on purpose or anything. So, and I think that's important because it also leaves a very large question mark when you think about what the original track list would have been and what part 2 really would have sounded like had Peep's actual product been put out the way he intended. We'll never know. We can only speculate. But I'm sure it would have been just as beautiful as this one is, if not more. Peep was a very raw artist, so I feel like you can't reproduce his style. The way it was capsulated and captured is the way it must be released. He wasn't a party musician or a party rapper. He was an emotional songwriter. So you can't really tamper with that. It's timeless and it just needs to be left alone. That's not a knock on Smokeasac. This is one of Smokeasac's shining moments. He's had many. The overall success and achievements Peep obtained are with Smokeasac being next to him or behind him. So Smokeasac is very relevant and very dear to a lot of the positive side of Peep's career. So no shade on Smoke at all. It's a very important aspect. So this song is just, I think it's a masterpiece. And even though it's a demo version, I still feel like we still never got the full original version of this. Meaning, even though there's a lengthy demo of this song, of the original version, I still feel like there's another version of that with different parts on it. So it just would have been very interesting to hear that one, because I'm pretty sure there's another full version of this song. I just think we got the early leak. So, but even the early leak is very beautiful, and even for a bootleg, it sounds very good. I mean, I listen to it in the whip all the time, going to work, and it bangs. It sounds pretty clean. I just wish that was the song this is the song I was really looking forward to the most on November 9th. Like, I could not wait to get the high quality version of Leanin. Like, I really cannot tell you guys how fucking excited I was to finally be able to hear like a studio sounding version of this song. So I was like shattered when I heard it was just completely reproduced in a completely different song. I know a lot of fans embraced the new version, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's awesome that you do. But me personally, I just waited so long for a high quality version of this one, the one that we're covering today. So I really love the, like I said, I love the overall sound that Peep was starting to fuse in all his music. At this point, he wasn't really afraid to show his love and obsession with a nice chorus sounding guitar, or a guitar with a little bit of gain on it and just a nice chunky tone. And I think this is very important because in the later part of Peep's career, he was really super gluing this style to all of his music. All of his musical output was starting to have really heavy laced guitar rhythms, and it was very beautiful. And I know he kind of always did that, but this was really sounding I think his later music was very reminiscent to like In Utero, almost like a rap version of In Utero. And I know that might drive some fans crazy, but I mean that with all due respect, as him being like a genius to be able to do that. I also think this song is important because it obviously displays the power of Peep's style and how you can't put him in a box. Like, he's the only artist I can think of where you cannot narrow him down to a certain genre. I mean, he literally, even though he can be categorized in hip hop, he could be the poster boy for rock, for alternative, for grunge, for pop, just for everything. It's very fascinating that he was so original that he could literally be a poster boy for any subgenre of music. There's not too many artists like that. It's just very fascinating that he was able to do that with his music. Usually artists are labeled, and I know Peep and Tracy didn't like to be labeled. You know, you heard Tracy say, "Don't call me emo, don't call me punk." You know, these guys didn't like to be labeled. They didn't like to be put in a box. They wanted to stay out of the box. It's, like I said, really sad we'll never get the full studio version of the original song. I think it's very interesting with fishnarc adding his musical his musical side to it, and the overall production of smokeasac, which is, he is just a genius and just a brilliant engineer. And I think smokeasac is a very very original producer. He has his own clean sounding production, and his percussions have their own kind of signature bounce to them, and I think it's very important to his work and to his legacy. I was trying to die last night.